Gute Woche. As you see on the screen, I hope you can see the screen. Unfortunately, we heard the news about Shabbos, of the passing of my nephew Yisrael ben Binyamin Alav Shalom, who had a illness condition for the last 3 weeks, and unfortunately passed away today. Just perhaps one or two words in his memory. He was a very special neshama, always keen to avoid it in Lashon Hara very much, and always keen to try to be mizakeh another yid with a mitzvah. He had a tremendous chayes in mitzvahim. He would go in the mitzvah tank with his crutches and all, try to persuade another person, or he would contact people with the telephone, and really, despite his very severe disabilities, he did whatever he could to be mezakeh another yid to encourage them to do mitzvahs, and Yehi Zichrei Baruch he will remain an inspiration for many of us who knew him. Okay, let's go to our list of questions now. Last week we had a discussion about Mayim Achronim, and I mentioned about the difference between Alpi Nigla and Alpi Chassidus, so to speak, whether you do a little bit or a lot. So after the Shir, Rabbi Kievman from Liverpool sent me a clip of seeing how the Rebbe washes Mayim Achronim with a small cup, like a Revia size cup, into a little bowl. And his caption was "Ajalavit nishkin Wasser." It's not skimping. So I responded to him in comparison to the Rebbe's, how do you say, generosity of nature. So that wasn't a lot. Anyway, but it doesn't mean you have to be mamish, drops mamish. Well, instead of washing up to the fingers till the knuckles, to wash just the fingertips. That's the minhag by Chassidim. Let's go on to the first question which we have, which is also continuing from last week. When giving a gift to a non-Jew and wants us to give wine and chocolates, is it allowed to buy and give non-kosher wine and non-kosher chocolates? So, mentioned last week, and we went through this, gave some time for this, that stam yeinom, according to the Mechaber, according to the Shulchan Aruch, is oseh b'hanor, even bizman hazeh. The Ashkenazim take the view that b'di'evet, it's not oseh b'hanor. But to start buying a bottle of wine, now we all know that something which is oseh b'hanor you can't give as a gift either. So to go and buy a bottle of wine to give to a goy, so the answer is no, and one shouldn't be doing so, because giving a gift is also another form of hanor. By contrast, chocolates, that's not a problem, because you are allowed to have hanor from Isur, from Chol of Akum, that's not a problem. Or even if it were other Isurim, that's not a problem. They're no Isur hanor there, and therefore you could buy non-kosher chocolates, but you shouldn't be buying a bottle of wine for a goy. Of course, you can find alternatives, which I'll leave to you for your imagination. The next question we have was actually a question from somewhere in the Ukraine, and about the bris of an adult. Does the presence of the sandik acquit from saying Tachanun that day, or just the Suda that follows? So for those who are not so familiar with the procedure, of course, the bris of an adult is a much more, delicate process, and it's obviously done in private. There's also no sandik in the literal sense, because no one's going to sit there with the adult on his lap. But they do designate. It is customary to designate a kind of chaperone person or kibud. That person is the sandik. But I don't think that Sandik has got the status of Sandik Lahalocha, because Sandik is the one who's actually, as we mentioned last week, the lap is like the Mizbeach of the Ktoris, etc. I don't think that the kibbut of being the chaperone for the one who's having the bris would qualify as Sandik to acquit from uh, from Tachnun when they're present in Shul. Now, I was thinking, what about the father? There's an interesting question. If it happens to be that the father of an adult is having a bris, is present in shul, but what's the simcha of Avi Ben? That he has a duty to do the bris, to bring his son into the covenant of Abraham, and he's doing so today. Once the child is an adult, it's not the father's privilege, it's not his duty. It's already on the child. It's on the son who's having the bris. It's not the father's. I don't think the father would qualify as a bal simcha when his son is having a bris. I never had this shiloh. It's a bit far fetched. Okay, fine. Having said that, by these brisen of the adults, of course, they make also a suda, and that suda is obviously a suda's mitzvah. I'm not going to go into the details here, because I don't know how many people are involved in this kind of thing on a regular basis, but it's interesting. What do you do about the brachas? So what we do at the bris, there's 4 brachas which are said at the bris. The moil says al hamila. The father says asheket shon mitzvah b'tzivanu lachnisa shel Avraham Avinu. So those are both said, and the moil they're both said by the moil, and when there's no father there, the moil will say both brachas. He'll also say the bracha of lachnisa. But then the bracha with the cup of wine, and then Asher Kiddush did me beten, that's done after the bris. So there's a whole discussion about how long after the bris can you still take the glass of wine and say the brachas Asher Kiddush did me beten. So that's another discussion. But I certainly feel that the Suda, if there's a Suda which is in honor of the bris, it would be qualified as a Suda's mitzvah. And also, if people had convened to join in this Suda, so that would be also a simcha enough to justify not saying Tachna. Let's go on to the next question. In Shul, it was Kiddush, and I drank a small amount of Kiddush wine, and a reasonable amount of cake. In other words, a shear to say bracha achreina. What happens by bracha achreina? Do I mention the wine in the bracha achreina? Now, we know that generally the halacha is that to make a bracha achreina on food, it has to be a kazais. To say a bracha achreina on drink, it has to be a revius. There are poskim who hold that the shear for bracha achreina of liquids is also kazais. Curiously, the Alter Rebbe mentions dafka about yain, kazais of yain. He doesn't talk about other liquids, but other poskim would also mention. But let's keep to the wine, because this is our topic. So now, if you had between a kazayas and a revius of wine, you've entered into a dilemma. Yes, bracha achrona, not bracha achrona, and therefore it's advised either to have less than a kazayas or a revius or more, to avoid entering to the bracha this dilemma. That's if you have wine on its own. Now that you're having wine, but you're having cake also. So now, if you're already making a bracha achrona on the cake in any case, so then you can incorporate the bracha achrona on the wine too. So this is here you have a quote from Ksos HaShulchan, which where he says, "Umistaver sheim ochal peiris mizayin amina pochos me'at mechatzi beya, shu sofik in chay bracha achrona." If you had a pochos mikashir or sofik with mishosa yayin she'ochal, I'm sorry, I missed out the last line. So he says you should incorporate them. So you have this idea that when you have a shear of mezainas, a shear for alamichya, and you have a questionable shear for ala gefen, so you will incorporate this. Now comes to the next question. Now, when it comes to bracha achrona, so we know that bread is the king of all foods, and wine is the king of all drinks. And at a kiddush, for example, if you had a Bayer Priagofen, whether you made a Bayer Priagofen or you ate a Priagofen, so then you don't make a bracha on the lemonade and not on the vodka or the whiskey, whatever you have by the kiddush. They're all included with the Bayer Priagofen. They're all like servants of the melech of the wine. The same thing is with bracha achrein, that you don't make a bracha achrona separately on the other drinks because you're making a bracha achrona on the wine. But here you get an interesting dilemma, because actually the how do you say, the wine is hitchhiking, is taking a piggyback on the mezonos. The mezonos, you had a shear. The wine, you're not even sure whether you had even if you had a kazayis, is also a dilemma. So now, what about the other drinks? You had a little bit of wine, and then you had a revius or more. We mustn't say of whiskey. You had a revius or more of lemonade. So does your al hagefen, which is only like a piggyback of al hagefen, does it cover for the lemonade? So lepoil, it's a suffix, and it's questionable. And the solution would be to have actually a kashir of takeh, of let's say salad or something, which justifies a burden of nefashos in any case. And in that way, you'd make a burden of nefashos on the salad, and that would include also the suffix about the drinks. So this is actually the lower part of what you have on the screen is from a sefer called Kisvei Reb Chaim Eliezer Bichovsky. He was a very interesting character, this Reb Chaim Eliezer Bichovsky, a brilliant man. He was the publisher of a lot of svarim which we have, Derech Mitzvah and the Tilim Yaloir, and the Derech Emuno, and the Tilim with the Tzemach Tzedek. I've just mentioned that, but there's quite the first volume of Eirat Torah. He lived in and he published a lot of stuff. This is one from his writings. So he has mamish this question. This was published about 30 years ago in New York. If you had a mezonos of kazayis and yain less than a shir, and you're making a bracha achrona for the mezonos, he says it's just, he brings two svaros, and he brings here Gemara Shabbos of greater and greater de greater. So whether something which is already only a piggyback thing can take something on it as a piggyback for itself also? Can the wine which is piggybacking on the on the cake, on the mezonos, can also take the lemonade on it? So he says to the point, it remains an unresolved suffix, and therefore the solution, if it's available, is to have something, a food which is definitely very nefashos, and you make a separate bracha achrona on that, and includes the drink. Let's move on. So one of our listeners is on here tonight, Baruch Hashem, asked about his davens in a Nusach Ashkenaz shul, and they reach Oleinu sooner than I do. That's what he asks. Should I stop to say?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm confused about the previous halacha. How does the drinking of how does the burden of foshes cover the geffen?
No, it won't cover the geffen. The question is whether the lemonade is going to have a bracha achrona. You'll see hagefen, but there's lav davka that's going to cover the lemonade, because the whole hagefen was only a piggyback.
But a geffen never covers the burden of foshes anyway.
It does if it's lemon. If you had a revius of wine, so the Boyer Priagofen covers for the lemonade for bracha rishona, it covers it for bracha achrona too.
Are you telling me? I mean, it's Pamir Chiddush.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that if you like Havdalah, let's supposing after Havdalah, for example, I had a drink of water, cup of coffee, and then I made the main shalosh on the geffen, I don't have to make a burden of foshes on the coffee?
You shouldn't have made a bracha rishona nor a bracha achrona. Correct. Yes. I don't have the Mar Makomis in front of me. I can provide it afterwards.
I hear.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Let's move on. Okay. So now, so we're talking about davening in Ashkenaz shul, and they get to Aleinu because the Minig Nusach Ashkenaz goes straight after Aleinu to straight after Asher Volatzir, straight to Aleinu. They don't say in the weekdays. They don't say Allah Seder, the Shir Shel Yom and Ktoiris, which is in Nusach Sfard and Nusach Hari. So inevitably you're going to get this problem. I'm going to confess that I have this problem almost every day because I don't read Ivra that fast, and perhaps I didn't spend enough time in Rebbe Strux's class. So instead, and the Chazan use goes a bit faster. So very often, almost every day, the Chazan's on for Shir Shel Yom, I'm on for Shir Shel Yom, the Chazan's on for Leinu. So even in Nusach Harishol, yeah. So here we have a letter of the Rebbe, the Rebbe was asked this very question. The letter was published in the back of a Kuntras of Sichas 9 years ago, Chayesora Tovshin Beis. It hasn't been published in a Sefer yet. So the Rebbe was asked this very question. You can see here the person asked the question. I daven in a shul Nusach Ashkenaz because there's no Chassidish minyan, and I daven Nusach Hari, but I don't know what to do about Aleinu because there is an inyan of saying Aleinu with the tzibur, and therefore should I say Aleinu before Shir Shel Yom, or should I say at the end of davening, or should I say it twice? After davening, because it's the last thing of davening, and also before Shir Shel Yom in order to say it with the tzibur. He says, I think that is in the Eshel Avram of the Buchacharov. He says that you should mafsik to Aleinu until Ein Oid, even in the middle of Psukkah Zimra. And the question is here, if I say it once, to say it with a minute, how far should I say it? Should I say the whole of Aleinu and only half the Aleinu? I'm going to tell you that I looked up, I searched for this Eshel Avram and I couldn't find it, but fine. So meanwhile, that's the question put to the Rebbe. The Rebbe's answer is Oleinu yoimroi besiyum kol hatfila kimevu bekisvi arizal. So Oleinu belongs, that's kind of the finale of the davening, and it gives a reference to Kisvi Arizal, which is quoted here in Pri Etz Chaim. Oleinu Shabech is the last piece of davening. But v'gam yitztarif v'yoimrei keshahatzibur oimrei. But you should also join in with the tzibur when they're saying Oleinu kimavur, and the Rebbe left it blank. It possibly was never delivered, this letter. It's just from the draft in the Rebbe's office. And bebeis hapeomim yoimiroi kuloi. So you'd say Oleinu, the whole Oleinu twice. Now, so that I think answers the question. I'm just going to add just one thing, which I'm not so sure, but I'm telling you my own experience is that because of my lack of speed in the Ivra, so by the time I'm finished till the first paragraph, usually the Chazan has already finished the second paragraph. So the whole reason why I have to say it is because I'm saying with the Tzibur. But if the Tzibur are finished and they're already saying Kaddish, so I don't see the need to say it again. But if the Tzibur are saying the whole Aleinu patiently, so you should say it with them, and then you'll go back to your Seder of davening. You'll say Shir Shel Yom and Ein Kelikenu and Ktoides, and then you'll say Aleinu twice. Okay. Then, from the same person, he asked the question that he had heard. He was told that he shouldn't recite Ktoides after Mincha. What if I'm running late? So there's a general idea that you have in Shulchan Aruch, in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. If you come late to shul, you skip this, you skip that. That's certainly written in Shulchan Aruch. And then there is a mahalach more al pi Kabbalah, which is that you follow the route of davening regardless. You just follow your route and you don't skip. This is brought in the Kaf HaChaim. He mentions this. So normally it would be correct, perhaps, but when it comes to Ktoides by Mincha, so now you also have to weigh out what's called a din and what's a midas chassidus. To say, of course, to say Ktoides before davening is midas chassidus. Now there's a minyan, you daven with the minyan. Especially if you are a leading person in the minyan, you daven with them. So then someone had told him that there's a problem of saying Ktoides after Mincha, saying Karbonis after Mincha. So I did find this. I found this in the Aruch HaShulchan, I think it's, do I have it referred to here? Yeah, Aruch HaShulchan Reish Lamed Daled, he does have an objection to it. I must say that the Magen Avraham talks about a strong objection not to say Ashrei after Mincha, which was also not so clear. Does it mean Ashrei after Mincha or Ashrei after nightfall? That's not so clear, but there is certainly one should endeavor to say Ashrei before Mincha, even if you're running late. You try to say Ashrei before starting Mincha. But what about Ktoires, Karbonis and Ktoires? So here we have there's a tshuva from the late Rav Schneebal. He lived on Clapton Common. He was the Rav of the Vision. It's a shul over here. And he published 8 volumes of Shalos Tshuvas called Shraga HaMeir. And this tshuva is actually addressed to our Reb Beryl Chaykens al Zayin Gesund. It's written in Tafshinun base. Reb Beryl had already emigrated to Cleveland. He was Rav of Anash in Cleveland already then. And Reb Chaim Vishnebel writes to Rabbi Chaykens al Zayin Gesund about this. And he says it's okay to say Karbonis after Mincha. And one of the sources which he gives is this Gemara, a Braise in Gemara Sukkah. This is about, and Dafnun Gimel Amud Aleph, and this is about the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. So Tanya Omer B'Shua ben Chananya, Keshahayinu Smeichim b'Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, when we were celebrating Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, Lo Yira'inu Shina Beineinu. Over Sukkos in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mamish didn't have a chance to sleep. The first thing in the morning was the korban. The morning korban, Mishom Letfilah, Mishom LeKorban Musaf, Sukkos, every day there's a korban Musaf, Mishom Letfilah Samusofi. It's a korban Tomid, and then Tfilah Shachris. Musaf, and then Tfilah Samusaf. Mishom LeBeis HaMedrash, they went to the Beis HaMedrash, had probably Shiurim, whatever. Mishom LaChilo Shesiyah. Mishom Letfilah Samincha, then they davened Mincha, Mishom letomid shel bein harbayim. So the korban tomid was brought after Tfilas Mincha. So although we, on a regular basis, we say the karbonis before Mincha, but we have here a source. This is Rabbi Chaim Vishnebal in his Shraga Mei. He says here we have a source in the Gemara that the korban tomid, the physical korban tomid Samidosh, was brought after Mincha. So nish gefährlich. So normally you follow the Seder in the Siddur, but if you are running late, etc., you can rely on the on this source, and you could say you could say it afterwards. What's going to be interesting as I'm speaking would be if your shul does Mincha Maidiv in one right after the other, then to say karbonis after Ma'ariv, that won't be that wouldn't make sense. You have a lashon trei kuli desosri, trei koli desosri. It would be a contradiction. Once you've davened Ma'ariv, to start now saying karbonis as if you're going back today, that would be a problem. As there is a question about putting, if a person's ready davened Ma'ariv and they realize they haven't put on tefillin, can you still put on, and it's still day, can you still put on tefillin? Well, the tefillin is a mitzvah deraisa, saying karbonis is agut azach, but it's not so chomor. So if you have davened Ma'ariv, so then I think you wouldn't be able to go back and say karbonis.
Would it be better to say karbonis and miss out saying Ma'ariv b'tzibur, or would it be better to miss karbonis to daven Ma'ariv b'tzibur?
All right, that's a good question. If you were always davening Ma'ariv early, then perhaps you should daven Ma'ariv early, because otherwise you might forget also, yeah? Okay, let's move on.
Sorry, Diane, are you aware that the chat's disabled?
No, I don't. It was disabled last week also.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's disabled. I don't know why it's disabled. If someone wants to tell me how to do it, I'll disable. No, it doesn't say anything. I'm sorry.
And Diane, again, by Psuke de Zimra, al pi din, a person should skip the Psuke de Zimra to daven Baruch Hu.
Yes.
And Brichos Kriya Shman Shmona Esrei with the tzibur.
Yes.
But al pi Chasidus,
right.
What should we as Hasidim do?
You make sure you get there on time, and if you're late, so you'll take your time and you'll daven properly. And there's a letter of the Rebbe to the late Rabbi Dubov, where if you have Talmidim, they come late and they start skipping, and what's going to be tomorrow? It'll become a seder of skipping. It's, it's the whole halachas of skipping is for someone where it was very exceptional, but on a regular basis, it's not recommended.
Can I don't want to keep you, can I just quote something which I saw many, many years ago at Dogmer Vovo?
Yes.
I saw that he said that if a person pushes daven slowly every single day, and it's a problem from every day, he does not have to skip.
Okay, very good. Thank
you.
You.
As I once I saw. It's only when, ain't mo, you skip.
The Dogma Vov is the Neda Behuda, by the way. So it's not even Lavdafka, Tzatomic Chassidus. It was, he's just saying that the whole din is a person comes late to shul on an exceptional basis. Yeah, thank you. Right, let's move on. All right, so now someone's asking me the following. There is a halacha that you're not allowed to make fleishike bread and you're not allowed to make milchike bread. And here we have the halacha. It's a quote from Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tzadik Zayin, the last siman in the Dinim Abasa B'Cholov. Tanu shetoche be'alyo, if an oven has been smeared with fat of an animal, the kosher fat, yeah. Ein oifen boy pas, you're not allowed to bake bread there. Achi yisikenu mibifnim, achi yislabein. You'd have to kasher it. You'd have to spread coals or something to kasher because you mustn't make fleishike bread. And the reason for this is that there shouldn't be that a person is going to take the bread and eat it with something with milchiks, etc. So there is an inyan that definitely that you shouldn't be making neither fleishike bread nor milchike bread. So now this woman is asking that her challah, she wants to bake it. She wants to bake it in a fleishike oven. Does she need to, is that okay? So the answer is that although lechatchila, when we bake a parva cake in a fleishike oven, lechatchila, we would avoid having that. We would avoid having that that cake together with coffee, etc., with milchiks. But that's a chumr, that's a lifnim shur sadin. But min hadin, it would not be. It's still parv, and therefore baking challah in a fleishike oven doesn't really make the challah fleishik min hadin, and therefore it's okay to bake your challahs in a fleishike oven. But of course, we bear in mind that we won't have that challah directly with milchik, but that is a lefnim shur sadin. It doesn't forbid us to bake it in the first place. Now here we have a very interesting question, and I'd be very, very interested in if anyone sees this written in any sefer. It's a Ger Tzedek. This is a question I got from Long Island. A Ger Tzedek. He was Megaya recently, very recently. As he was in the process of Giyur, he started the Masechta. He started the Gemara, and now he was Megaya, and now he's finishing the Masechta. So he's asking, is he able to make a siyum to include the learning which he learned before he was Megaya? That's his question. Very interesting question. So now it becomes very, very interesting because really a goy shouldn't be learning Torah Shebal Peh. On the other hand, is there a mitzvah, a prospective ger? Is there a mitzvah for that person to learn Torah? Now, here I've got a quote from the Sichos, and he refers to the Marsha, who says that the prospective ger should be learning Torah, and this is on the story in the Gemara with Hillel, with the whole story with Hillel and Shammai, the one who wanted that he should be taught the whole Torah while standing on one foot. That's on this piece of Gemara. And so the Marsha says that it looks like Hillel had taught him Torah before he was actually Megayer. Rabbi Akiva Eger disagrees. There's a tshuva, and he quotes the Marsha, he disagrees. Then the Rebbe refers to in this note to the Stei Chemed in two places. It's Stei Chemed in Marechas Aklolim and then in Pa'as HaSod, which I looked both of them up. But having seen all of the, reservations about this, the Rebbe takes the view that he has to learn Torah. Yiseirim is begeir, shemuta betalmud Torah keish yisgayer, v'yiseirim is chiyuv, shemoidiyim oisei. Before a geir is misgayer, you have to teach him some mitzvahs, and you say these are the mitzvahs, the consequences, etc. So of course you're teaching him Torah before. And the context of that sikha, if I remember correctly, is what do you expect? He's going to be Megayer and he has to do now all the mitzvahs. So how is he meant to know all the mitzvahs? He didn't have a chance to learn before. So of course he has to be able to learn the mitzvahs, being able to be before he's Megayer. So despite what Rabbi Kiva Eger objects to this and others object to this, the Rebbe takes a bepashtis, and that's actually, there's no question, that's the fact. Facts on the ground are that Geirim who are in the process of Geir do learn, it's very, they have got a whole syllabus. You may ask, learning a Gemara. Learning a Gemara is not the same as but on the other hand, learning a Gemara is part of Ayid Afkanan Gemara. You should be learning Gemara. It's part of the Yidiyas HaTorah to understand the mentality. So if he's able to learn Gemara, now I have a reference to a Ragachover, to the Chatzofnis Paneach. And he asks the question, he was asked the question whether a child under Bar Mitzvah can make a siyum in shul for Erev Pesach. Because a child's under Bar Mitzvah, so then he doesn't have a mitzvah to learn Torah. It's the mitzvah of the father to teach him, but he doesn't have a mitzvah to learn Torah. So can he make a siyum for Erev Pesach? So the Ragachover says, there's a difference, there's two mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah of Limud HaTorah, and there's a mitzvah of Yediyas HaTorah. And although the child does not have a mitzvah of Limud HaTorah, but once the child is going to turn Bar Mitzvah, all the Torah knowledge which he acquired will be contributing to his mitzvah of Yediyas HaTorah. And on that basis, Ragachover says he can make a siyum. So on that basis, I feel also comfortable to say here that the Geir should be able to make a siyum with the accumulation of the learning which he did before he was Megayer, and now because those Yediyas, and now he's now fulfilling mitzvahs Yediyas HaTorah with those Yediyas, which that information which he acquired from before, and therefore I believe it's now. It's obviously we're not talking here about a very we're not being matir aguna l'shuk, it's not a very serious shaila. It makes a siyum, so it's not such a big shaila. I was just thinking about this. You have a lashon din pruta kedin meya. You have to address the halacha about a penny like you have to address to 100 pounds. So possibly in halacha also, it may not be such a serious. The consequences are not so serious, but still, it's a part of your Torah, and therefore it deserves to be given the attention. And so I think it's acceptable.
Also, you could eat meat if it was made in the 9 days.
Yeah, okay. Also, but that's on the level of minhag, so I would still not put that as on par with heter aguna. Okay, let's move on. Right. So the next question which I have on the list is that this is a question from somewhere in Toronto, that he's a Jewish builder, Jewish contractor, and he was commissioned by I missed out the words on the sheet. He's a commission of someone of Indian origin, whether he can to build a house for him. This is a new build, and there's a lot of new build going on in Toronto, and obviously this person can afford to build a new house. And on the plans it says this room is the prayer room. So now there's a former contractor. He's a bit anxious. Is he allowed to build a prayer room? Obviously, if he had been asked to build a chapel or to build a church, he would turn down the contract. He wouldn't accept to make such a project. So it does say this is kind of addressed in the Mishnah in Avodah Zarah. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch Kuf Mem Gimel in Yeridea, where if you have a Jewish contractor building for a non-Jewish building a building, and so it says Higia Lekipo, when it comes to the dome over where the idol would be on display, that's where at that point he has to step back. He can't finish that piece of the job. The rest of the project he could do. So there is a lot of discussion in Poskim about when, if a Jew was commissioned to do various whether it's flooring or windows, which they know is going to be used for a church. So it is questionable whether they are allowed to. Some say that the church is not so much for the worship, it's for the people. It's to protect the people, not to protect the Avodah Zarah. So there's a lot of discussion. But I felt a little bit easier here because it's basically a room. It's a room in the house. And of course, his question was, because this fellow, as an Indian, it could be a Buddhist or a Hindu, which is Avodah Zarah, but had he asked him to design the room for worship, I would be more anxious. Here it's another room of the house. It's just giving a label, this room. So I didn't feel that there's such a problem in building that part of the house. And obviously, I'm also thinking that since there's no intrinsic features, he could change it around. He can change the dining room to the prayer room. It's not so strong. Okay, let's go on. Someone sent me a question: what bracha should be made over commercial applesauce? Do I have it on the list? I don't think we have it on the list here. No, that comes later. So when I was a bocher, I was a shikol mishpacha with later Zalman Shimon Dvorkin, and I asked him this question, and he pulled out the Yankiv Emden Siddur, the Siddur Beis Yaakov, and where he showed me where it says that the bracha on applesauce is an apple compote is Beire Pri Ha'etz. Now, number one, I want to say that the Yankiv Emden printed his Siddur in the year Tov Kuf Hey, which would be in, I think, 1745. Or Tov Kuf Beis. It was around the time when the Alter Rebbe was born, perhaps a little bit before. That was when Yankiv Emden lived. He himself was a printer. He printed some of his own Sforim at least. The Siddur was then published numerous times, and it was later given, the later editions were given the name Beis Yaakov. The publishers of the later editions took liberties and included a lot of material which was not from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And the long list of several pages of various foods, what bracha should be said on which food, that is not for Rabbi Yaakov Emden. It's and who it is, I don't know. It doesn't have a name put to it, but it's certainly not for Rabbi Yaakov Emden. So that's having said that, let's look at the halacha itself instead of just looking at names. There is a halacha that if something was kind of downgraded from its optimal use, so then it may lose the privilege of its bracha. So if it be a food which would very rarely be made into a stew, so then by making it into a stew, it would lose the bracha of Be'er Pri Ha'etz. Lifestyle may have changed. It could be that in Russia and in Eastern Europe, perhaps apples being made into stew was a much more common usage than it is today. And that's why whoever paskined at the time was saying that the bracha on applesauce is by Pri Ha'etz, because like you'd take on mashed potato. Although the potato is mashed, but that's a very normal way of using potatoes in mashed potatoes as to make it mashed. So therefore, the same svara could be with the applesauce, that it should be by Pri Ha'etz. The more contemporary poskim don't take this view. And as I say, it could be because of lifestyle has changed, and it's maybe that the quality of eating apples has improved, that people eat apples raw much more than they have cooked apples. And so generally, certainly the contemporary poskim take the view that the brocha on apple stew, which is pureed by a manufacturer, not that they make it at home, sometimes a bit lumpy, there are whole pieces, it's still ha'etz. But if it's mamish pureed thoroughly, so the general take on that is that it is shahakol. My father, would always, when we had apple stew at home, apple compoti, would always take something like grapes or something to put it in it, because everyone agrees that if you've already made her eights, you're already yotze. Questions are on the lechatchila, and therefore that would be the advice given to, if you're having applesauce, because of the dilemma, to put with it a fruit or pieces of fruit which are clearly visible, recognizable, and make her eights on that, and include the applesauce along with it.
Does that include Bramley's?
I was just going to say there are apples specially for cooking, Diane.
Yes, so those for sure, that when they're cooked, but it doesn't. Wait a minute, Bramley's you can't eat kemat when they're raw. You have to cook them, but it doesn't mean you have to puree them. You can have them. You can make them into, how do you say, apple strudel, things like that. It's lav dafka. It has to be pureed.
No, but they cook to almost to a puree.
Yeah, all right.
They cook down.
Yeah. So then there's another. Then that also comes into the question: do you look at that specific species of apples, or do you go overall apples? It still remains a shtickle suffix. I think this Baruch Hashem. We're not living in a Baruch Hashem. We have raisins in the house or some other fruit. We can solve the problem easily without having to insist on dafka making on her eights or hashahakal. We can avoid the suffix without too much sacrifice. Let's move on. Okay, this is a difficult question. And this is, someone writes to me the following. He sells kosher foods on eBay. Now, he lives somewhere in the northwest London, that's somewhere in greater northwest London. And it turns out there's a customer who bought something online from him who lives in Hendon, in northwest London. It happens to be that on eBay, he's selling this item for 3 times the price that is available locally. So I really haven't digested what's the reason why people are ready to pay 3 times the price when okay, but he's asking the question, if assuming that the customer is there are advertised as kosher foods, does he have to inform her, that you could buy it locally for much less? It could be that she is self-isolating and therefore she's happy to pay extra for the service of having delivery to the house. All right, so now what we're dealing here with is 2 questions. One is Isur Oino'o, and the other one is Isur Hafko'as She'orim. One is deception, and the other one is price hiking. These are 2 separate parts of Shulchan Aruch, and deception. Is it a deception? I don't know. I think if the regular shops, regular retailers advertise their prices, so I don't know whether I'm not sure whether it's called a deception. But let's take a look about the question of price hiking. And I want to ask you the question, let's say there was a time where there was a shortage of petrol because of something or other, some crisis, world crisis. I have I have a petrol station and I have a stock of petrol. Would it be justified that I hike the price because there's low supply and high demand? Am I allowed to hike the price because of it, or am I not allowed to? This is the question. So let's take a look over here. This is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. It's also in Rambam, etc. V'chein chayovim lahamid. This Bezdin have a duty lahamid memunim al she'orim. Bezdin have a duty to appoint people in charge of prices. Shelo yarviach kol echad masha yirtzeh. That people shouldn't just be profiting, indiscriminately. She'osu lahadom laharviach b'dvorim sheyesh b'hem chayi nefesh. One shouldn't be making a profit on vital foods. Kagoin, he says zeisim. What do you say there? Sorry. Kagoin. I don't know why this is blocking me. like wine and oil and flour. Your markup can be elahashtus, a sixth, which means if it's worth £5, you can make it worth, you can sell it for £6. Which means you take the £5 and you divide it into 5, and then you add one of those five parts and add it on top. So in other words, basically from £5 to £6, that you're allowed to. One who hikes the prices and sells things for more than that, he is compared to someone who's lending money for interest, and he's violating what it says, your brother shall be able to live with you. Best can punish him, etc. This is said when he's selling the goods without effort, just in out. But if a shopkeeper, he spends time in the shop, he opens the shop, he spends time in the shop, he's selling bit by bit. One is allowed to incorporate in the pricing his effort and his costs. And on top of that, he can add another sixth. Here's an interesting leniency. That if the price of that commodity has risen, you have in stock, you bought it for cheaper, but now the price has risen, so you are allowed to sell it at a new price. Even though it's gone double in price from the amount, so you're making a much greater profit margin. But now, if that's the new price, you are allowed to sell at the new price. Now, there's actually three categories over here. That which we've said, that you're not allowed to hike the price more than 1/6, that's very basic foods. Things which are to enhance the food, pilpul, cumin, and pepper, other flavorings, or eggs. You are allowed to go up till twice the original, what you bought it for, just under what you call it, 100% increase or 50%, however you are going to work it. You can go up till twice what you paid. Then there's a third level. Foods which are not vital foods at all. I'm not sure, perhaps these are just spices for perfume rather than for food. I know that kost means costus, but I wouldn't recognize him in the street. And levoin is frankincense, which again I wouldn't recognize in the street. I'll call upon those things. Those exotic items, you are allowed to make whatever profit you want. Then he goes back to the eggs. I'll call upon him. It's so coming back to our question, would it be correct to raise the price? And how, it's a difficult story here, because who sets the price? But if there is an advertised price of let's say the manufacturer has an advertised price for this item, when we do have a problem of selling it for so much more, unless you're going to say that the service of delivering online and all that, delivering it, packaging and delivering it, but perhaps if that service justifies the extra expense, as we said before, that would be okay. But just to advertise a higher price, it seems to be problematic, and I'm still worried on both points. I'm worried about the Einoah, because the person may not be aware that it's available for less, and then I'm worried a little bit about this high price hiking.
I actually asked the question, and on Sunday, someone bought some memorial candles from me who actually live in Edgware. I live in Edgware, they live in Edgware. So the memorial candles are, for argument's sake, £3. Postage is £3. eBay charged their fees. PayPal charged their fees. So everything has to get added on before I make my profit for my 1/6. Would that be everything added on and then a 1/6?
Yeah. Just a second. When looking back at the text, he seems to be saying that because he says you include the effort and the overheads, and on top of that you can add a sixth. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually did. I knocked off I sent them back the postage and I delivered it by hand. So
okay,
it's not fair. It's not fair to them.
Yes,
it could be I didn't know what it was. Self-isolating. I didn't know,
yes.
So I put it through their letterbox.
Okay, thanks for sharing with us.
Okay.
I just felt that just going through the halacha, learning it inside would be just help clarify the issues.
Is the justification for the price of kaparas because it's not eichel nefesh?
I don't know what the overheads are. And I don't know. Well, closer to Yom Kippur, we'll have to look into that. All right. We have one last question on our list, and that is about Yortzeit. Now, this is particularly relevant this year because Yud Shvat is on the Shabbos, and generally most of our Anash are mishtadel to have an Aliyah. So should the Aliyah be on the day of Yud Shvat or should it be on the Shabbos before? And what's the question? Because Shabbos is a mashpia for the whole coming week. So let's read this inside. This is from Sefer HaMinhagim, as you see. Shabbos shelifnei yom hayortzeit. Oy b'yom hayortzeit. Oy b'yom hayortzeit. Im chol b'Shabbos oylem l'toyre l'maftir. So the Shabbos before the Yortzeit, if it's on a weekday, or if the Yortzeit is on Shabbos, then one should try to have Aliyah and Dafka Maftir. I want to digress for a moment. What was published in this week in the Hiskashrus, something which I never heard before. Why was it that the Rebbe was Ola to Maftir? And as we know that really Maftir is allowed also, can be a cotton, can be given Maftir. So why is it that the Rabbeim, L'Deirei Seim, would be Oila for Maftir? So there is in the Hiskashrus, they have a conversation, I think, with the Buyana Rebbe, with our Rebbe, I think, and the Buyana Rebbe says, the Rebbe says, I have a kuntrus of 72 pages discussing about the union of Maftir, which I'm fascinated to see. But meanwhile, he says, he heard the following. By the Alter Rebbe was a Talmud of the Maggid, of the Mizritchi Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe was the youngest. And this is appropriate, we're just now coming from the Yortzeit, from Chavdal Tevis. The Maggid would have Shlishi. The Alter Rebbe, because he was the youngest, he was given Maftir. Like, because you can give it to a child. So because he was the youngest, he was given Maftir. Once the Alter Rebbe kind of has his own following, but this is what he did by the Maggid, so he wants to continue what he did by the Maggid. So he kept on going for Maftir because that was what he did by the Maggid. And then that remained L'Deirei Seim, the Rebbe's, because the Alter Rebbe did so. So for all the Deiros of the Rebbeim, they had the preference to be Oila L'Maftir because that's what the Alter Rebbe did by the Maggid. And the Rebbe was very much appreciated this reason which the Bayana Rebbe told him. Okay. That's talking about which preference, not on the yard side. But here we see for a yard side, and I was looking, what's the reason why a yard side Dafka would want to have, and also Duchon Avelis? What's the preference to Dafka be Oila for Maftir? So one Sefer says, perhaps it's because in the Brochus of Maftir, it talks about Chias HaMesim or something like that. I think a very simple level. The inyan of saying Kaddish is to sanctify Hashem's name. Yiskadol v'Kaddish Shmei Rabbo. Every Kaddish, every Omim which you bring about, etc. In der Welt is also Shalosh Shudas. A person has a Yortzeit, they will sponsor the Shalosh Shudas, then they have the privilege of benching. What is benching? Again, it's a Kiddush Shmei Hashem Barabim. The Maftir, a regular Aliyah, has got two Aliyahs. Has two brachas, sorry. A Maftir has got 7 brachas, so it's a much bigger Kiddush Hashem. So possibly that's the reason for saying, for preference to have Maftir on the Yortzeit of the Shabbos before. I want to just go, this is Rebbe's Ha'ara, and he says, Shabbos lifnei Yortzeit. And he gives a reference to Shari Ephraim, from Ephraim Agolis, which is all about Kriyas HaTorah. And then he says, "Udeloikim Meshikosav b'Maaseh Avraham dimchol b'Shabbos mafti b'Shabbos shelfonov." Who's this Maaseh Avraham? So I managed to find. It looks like this Maaseh Avraham is like a Sephardic sefer from about 300 years ago. Probably, I didn't check this out. Probably the Birkei Yosef himself was a Sephardi. Probably the Birkei Yosef quotes him. Now the Maaseh Avraham, he says that if the Yortzeit is the next Shabbos, you should have Aliyah on this Shabbos, the Shabbos before the Yortzeit. I find it interesting why the Sephardim in the Sephardic Sforim, they call it Yortzeit, which is a word in Yiddish. But be that as it may. So what the Rebbe is saying here is not like the Maaseh Avraham, who says that you need the Shabbos before the Yortzeit, even if the Yortzeit is on Shabbos. So it's to exclude from that. We have here the statement here in the Pnim, in the Sefer HaMinhagim, Oy b'yom ha'yortzeit imichol b'Shabbos. And therefore the answer is very clear that our minhag is that there's a Yortzeit on Yud Shvat, so there's no emphasis to have an Aliyah on Gimel Shvat. On the Yortzeit, the emphasis is to have an Aliyah on Yud Shvat, and so that's what we come to the end of our shir for today.
Would that be the same with Yom HaLedis?
Probably the same, yes.
I tell you, I can just tell you the story in Toshin Lamed Beis. I was in Yechidus waiting to see my cousin. My cousin's birthday is on the first day of Pesach. And he went into Yechidus, and the Rebbe asked him when Yom HaLedis, and I can't remember what it was, but Pesach is doch Yom HaKriya. And he told him, "Stomos to Gahatan Aliyah, the Foradik Shabbos."
Oh, so yeah. So you have before Yom HaLedis, you'd have an Aliyah on probably the Yortzeit too. You'd have Aliyah on the Shabbos, the preceding Shabbos, and then if it's on a Yom HaKriya, you have an Aliyah on the same day also. You'd have both.
Yeah.
All right. I wish you all a good Tavoch, and we should hear only Besuras Tevis.
Dainoskin, I think the Biyan Rebbe answered the Rebbe something. He said like that the it's Yoni Asafir, that there is a different reason why the Alter Rebbe had maftir. No, there's something else.
I don't know. That's what I read this morning, but
I read the shtickle, but
that's why I understood.
The Biyan Rebbe added something to what the Rebbe said to him.
All right, I'll have to check that up again. Okay.
Is there an Inyan that the Bayan had the last Aliyah, whether it's weekday or after? If there's 4 Aliyahs, he gets the 4th, in order to be Mila, all of the other Aliyahs.
Okay, that's nice.
That's what I heard many years ago.
Okay. And I sent you an email about the chat, which should help to re-enable it.
All right, Beseda, thank you. All right, good.
Thank you very